Hi, this is Marty Schiff, and you're listening to the Movie Rage Show.
It's time for the Movie Rage, and tonight's victim is producer-actor Marty Schiff that has done many films such as Creepshow, Dead Time Stories, Volume 1, Dawn of the Dead, and many, many others. Hello.
Hi, how you doing, Mike?
Fantastic, man. So what have we been up to lately? Been working on any projects or just basically kicking back? Anything outside of the film?
Yeah, well, I just got done producing a film called Pig Hill with Kevin Lewis, who directed Willy's Wonderland, if you've seen that. Probably having that ready to go. It's in post-production right now. I've got a couple of other things that I'm out there pitching right now, but with the strikes that are happening right now, things have kind of slowed down a little bit.
Now, even though some films that have been released prior to the strike, does that also affect as far as promoting or any even getting revenue from those films as well, including up to recent time if it was just released before the strike as well?
I read a little bit about some of the people that were scheduled for the San Diego Comic-Con won't be going because it's seen as promotion for films that they're worked on. None of the projects that I've worked on recently will be affected by that at all, but there are a lot of projects out there right now that are sort of waiting to see what happens.
Now, being involved with several artists on projects within the same realm with creating story or helping creating a story or a character, do you feel today's actors almost cling on to the same directors on their projects, using it for almost as a business revenue for themselves, for their craft? You yourself have lucked out by forming good relationships like with George Romero and so forth, and sometimes we do get a lucky break, but do you feel today that a lot of artists are using it as a business thing, not just to get their art out there?
I really believe that the Romero model that I, of course, was very fortunate to be part of, where George would use same crew, same cast over and over again until he got up into Monkey Shines and into the bigger budget projects. But if you look at the cast of Dawn of the Dead, for example, the majority of us from Dawn ended up in the movie Night Riders, which was his next movie. And then a bunch of us ended up in Creepshow as well. And I did a lot of theater before I got into films. My goal was always to work in film and television. But back in the day, there wasn't the kind of production that was outside of Hollywood or New York like there is today. And you didn't have film schools that you could go to like you can today. So we did theater. That was the next best thing. But when I did theater, I loved it so much that I did anything I could. I did lights and I did sound and I did sets and I stage managed and directed and technical directed. So I did just about every aspect of theater. And when I got into film, I was able to, because of my theater experience, I did lights on Creepshow. If you ever look at the credits of Creepshow, you'll see Marty Schiff as Garbage Man #1. But then if you look under the grip crew, you'll see Moonbaby Schiff. Well, that's my grip name, was Moonbaby, and that's my grip credit. So all the lighting effects that were done in Creepshow, majority of them, about 98% of them, were done by me on 2 theatrical lighting boards. And because I had the theater experience for Creepshow was Nick Mustangika. Nicky brought me in to run the light boards. I've been an assistant director, been a director, a producer. I've done craft services. I've done just about everything you can in film as well. And I believe that as a director and a producer, I like working with the same people over and over and over again. I like to find people that I like to work with, that work with the same style, and a lot of directors are that way. So I think it's not necessarily a business decision as much as, you know, when you're doing a film, it's like going to war and you want to be in the foxholes with people you can trust. And I think that's really what happens.
Oh, absolutely. And do you feel sometimes that it can actually bring them out of their comfort zone if they working with other directors and other artists in different films, but we're obviously working within the same director and so forth, they have to be out of their comfort zone, or they have to almost enhance within their comfort zone working with these same people so they can kind of grow even better as an artist?
I think, in my experience anyway, I can't speak for everybody, but from my experience, working with a director that I know and trust is much more comfortable than working with somebody brand new. I worked with George several times. I worked with John Harrison several times. You know, working with people that and that you're comfortable with, you can relax, and there's a level of trust there. You're going to end up doing the best work you can do, and they'll let you know and be honest with you about it, which is great.
Does that affect differently? Let's say you're famed, let's say, for example, like with Creepshow, and then let's say you get onto Creepshow 2, but you're not with the same people you worked with. How does that like really affect someone that is familiar, but now you're almost in a different realm? How does that really affect someone, like, especially, so how would you react to that, or at least work within that?
I think that, for me anyway, I was always a very secure actor, even though Creepshow 2 was a sequel, and there were a lot of people on Creepshow 2 that had worked on Creepshow 1, on the first Creepshow. It wouldn't have been a big deal for me. It really wouldn't have. And I think for most actors that are experienced and are professionals, they can handle it no matter who the director is.
Now, small roles usually get bigger with artists all the time, at some point in their career, at least. But do you think it's more of a variety of opportunity than just the role?
Dawn of the Dead was a case in point of that for me. I was brought on to do a stunt with Tom Savini. My first moment in Dawn of the Dead, I'm actually a stunt mat for Tom. Tom gets hit by a truck and lands on me. And George then brought me in to do another stunt as a stunt zombie into the Monroeville Mall. The stunt is in the European cut. It's not in the domestic cut. I get hit by a sledgehammer and thrown into a garbage can. And that happened to be the night that the motorcycle gang was brought into the mall for the first time. And they needed some actors to round out the motorcycle gang. So I just ended up being at the right place at the right time. So George put me in a leather jacket and gave me a pair of sunglasses, and I worked another 30 days on Dawn of the Dead. It was a case in point where I was brought in for 1 or 2 days to do some stunts, and then it became a role that actually started a relationship with many of people, with George and many people that George worked with, but it also got me my first film credit, and I was able to get a credit because of that. I was fortunate to have that happen. It happened to me a couple times on television. There was a TV show called Studio 5B, had a limited run, but I was brought in for 1 episode that ended up becoming 7 episodes. Sometimes it happens. I can't say that it always happened for me, but it did happen a few times. It can definitely happen.
Back with, like, as far as the role, like, when you got with Dawn of the Dead, like, the mentality as far as characterization goes, ever thought about what kind of character of this kind of biker? It's like, oftentimes actors would just simply take the role and then just go with it, and usually it comes out pretty well, and sometimes it doesn't go very well in their career because of that one moment, and yet the film gets pretty big, but yet their career kind of just goes ups and downs. So as far as the mentality of acting goes, like, did this start the creative process for you, or did it kind of scatter throughout and start off from that point when you got that role in that film?
By the time I was in Dawn of the Dead, I had already done 30 plays. I started acting when I was 14. So I was pretty confident, and a lot of Dawn of the Dead was improv, a lot of the fight sequences. And George would look at Tom and say, hey, we need to figure out how to kill 12 zombies tonight. And Tom would go to work and figure out how to kill 12 zombies. But a lot of times it was like, hey, come on over, we're going to do this bit. And, you just had to be ready to go. That happens, I would say, not always. A lot of times directors want everything scripted out. They want every moment, like if you look at Wes Anderson, every move is choreographed and calculated in his films just because of the image he wants on the screen. But a lot of times directors will just let you go organically and see where it goes. And some actors can handle it and some actors can't. There's a lot of actors that are uncomfortable with not having a script that tells them exactly what they're doing every moment. I happen to be one of those actors very comfortable with being able to just take the moment and run with it.
Was this also the same mentality that led up to Dead Time Stories as well?
Dead Time Stories, that was a little bit more structured than Dawn was. And one of the reasons was that we had a tight budget on, we had a tight budget on both, but Dawn had a much bigger budget, even though it was only 1.7 million. Dead Time Stories had a really tight budget, so we really had to watch what our shooting ratio was, which was how many takes to each scene. We were a little bit more structured on that project.
Television content, as far as the character goes, does it changes how an artist actually keep within that content? I mean, how does one stay adapted once they go into film and television? Like, then when they go into the television, how do they continue to adapt with character?
When you're producing, you want to get the best talent you can get, and part of that is during an audition, watching how a performer handles any adjustments that the director gives them. I watch that very closely, because if they handle the adjustment, if they make the adjustment, and if they're comfortable with it, that scores a lot of points for me. Television, when I was on Dallas, for example, you're shooting an hour show, you need to get 10 minutes of usable footage every single day you shoot. There's not a lot of wiggle room in there for trying and experimenting and things like that. You pretty much go in, you shoot the script that you were given, and you do it the way the director wants you to do it. And so television is much more structured than film. Sometimes on a film, you'll shoot a 12-hour day to get 2 pages of film done. On television, you need to get 10 pages of script done every single day you shoot. So it's a lot more structured, and it's a lot more down to business. Television is you roll up your sleeves, you go to work. Sometimes you get your script the night before, and you got to be ready to go the next day. And television is a much more condensed process than shooting a movie. You think about it, 1 2-hour movie is 2 1-hour episodes, and a 2-hour movie could take 4 months to shoot, 5 months to shoot. Those same 2 hours on television take 10 days. Television is a much more structured environment than shooting movies.
Having transferred from actor to producing, there's always that term marketable and bankable, usually applies to actors and so forth. How does that work within television, having to earn the title?
Producing for television and producing for film and producing for theater and producing for radio are all different animals. They are all different. Producing for television, you come up through a chain of command a lot of times in television. In today's world, for film, because of things like YouTube and Amazon, and there's ways for young filmmakers to get their work out there and get it seen where they can prove themselves, where somebody's going to say, this film is bankable. You know, you look at the Blair Witch Project, for example, very low budget, but a very creative idea that did very well, and those guys became bankable. Now, whether they were able to match their initial lightning in a bottle that they did with the original Blair Witch, I couldn't tell you. But in today's world, in movies anyway, you have the opportunity to prove yourself and prove that you are bankable much more than you ever did in the past. Television is still a process, still go through the process. And I'm talking network television. But things like Amazon and Hulu and Netflix, they will take a gamble on somebody if they can get something done and it's watchable and they feel that it has a market and an audience, then they'll give them a shot, even if they've only done 1 film or 2 films in the past. It's a whole different world out there now. The whole environment is completely different, and that's part of what the strikes are about. It's part of what the actor strike is about anyway. It's not just about the money. I think that people are coming to terms with that. It's the fact that artificial intelligence can recreate people to the point where it may put actors, and they're talking mostly about background actors these days, it can put a lot of people out of work. And so that's one of the things that is a sticking point in the strikes, and they're looking at that. So everything is changing so rapidly.
It is a digital world. Does that become even more expensive or less expensive if you were to work within just making projects specifically that are only going to be on like YouTube movies and all streaming and all that? Is that also even a much different ballgame for you if you were to get more hiring projects for that specifically?
I love to work, and I love to do the work, and I still am doing it. You know, here I've been in it for 40 some years, and I still love doing it. Digital has definitely made it more affordable. It's made it a lot faster. Back in the day when we did Dawn of the Dead, and when I was a production assistant on a movie of the week called Death Penalty that I also acted in, but I became a PA on that film, and part of my responsibilities was getting the daily film to the airport. And talk about pressure. You know, you had basically a day's worth of work in your car, and you had to get it to the airport on time so it could be flown to a lab in LA, processed, developed, and then sent back the next day. We used to call them dailies. Yeah, I'm sure people still do, but there was a process. You didn't know what you shot until you saw it in dailies the next day. Today, you set up a video village and you sit there and you watch every moment that's being shot as it's being shot. It saves you a ton of time and a ton of anxiety and a lot of money, ultimately, because you know what you got. You're not shooting on film. I think the last time I shot with film, from negative to processed print, was somewhere around $2 a foot. In a 2-hour movie, you've got somewhere around 43,000 feet of film. So, you know, you multiply that by $2, you're already at $100,000 before the thing is processed and made into a movie. We don't have those added expenses anymore. Now we can pretty much put everything on a memory card and review it, and we know what we have. And so it really has reduced the cost. When you get into these bigger pictures that have big crews, big talent, big cast, you're still looking at $100 million. 40 to 60 million is medium range for a studio picture these days. But a lot of movies, that being said, a lot of movies are still getting made for under $5 million, and they're good. They look good. It's all over the map now. Back in the day, you couldn't even shoot unless you could afford to buy enough film and rent the cameras, rent a Panavision or an Aeroflex, or there was only 2 or 3 brands out there that you could get. And before you even considered shooting a movie, you had to go into seeing if you could afford doing those sorts of things. So today it's much easier. It's a much easier world. You can't buy creativity. You can't buy talent per se. It still takes talent and creativity to make a good product, but you can do it at a much quicker, easier, affordable rate today than you could even 10 years ago.
As far as the producing aspect, like let's say you get hired for a project, multiple indie films, and some of them may not be presentable, but you have to work with a certain budget, like let's say a horror film or an action film. Like, what would you say would be a good start of the budget that you would have to work with in order to make this presentable, despite them having almost little to no in pocket as far as getting everything in the production of this film?
That's a hard question to answer, Mike, really, because, I saw a project today that when I read the script, I thought, I would do this for $3 to $5 million, and they were able to get it done for under $100,000, which to me is pretty amazing. It depends on what you want to invest in effects. It depends on what you want to invest in time. Depends on where you want to invest your locations, what you're going to have to pay for locations. And of course, talent is a huge factor. If you're working with actors that have somewhat of a name, well, that could cost you $100,000 right there. So it really depends on individual projects. And I look at a project, I may look at something a little bit differently than another producer that works on a lower budget or other producers that work on a higher budget. I'm sure there's producers out there that wouldn't touch projects that I've done because wouldn't want to get into it for under $5 million. So that's a really hard question to answer. It really depends on the script. It depends on how many locations, how many actors are there. I will say this, though. It all starts with the script. Everything. If people are listening and they're interested in getting into making a project, making a film, or even a pilot for a TV show, it all starts with the script. I read some scripts sometimes that are they're unshootable because the writer who wrote it doesn't think like a producer. They only think like a writer, and so they don't really think of a project from a production perspective, and a lot of them don't have the experience to do that. But it really starts with the script. Get a good script, get together with somebody that knows what they're doing as far as can build a budget for that project, and go from there. A lot of people have access to money. They have access to, let's say, $100,000. They want to do a movie, and they try to reverse engineer it. And the best thing to do at that point is to find a movie that has 2 or 3 locations, 5 or 6 actors, and you can get it done in 10 days, and that's what you want to do. You want to reverse engineer if you have the money first. I highly recommend finding the script first and then going from there, but it can be done either way.
A lot of people, they leave their home state to obviously start their careers and have all kinds of different business adventures and film and television and so forth. And when they have to eventually come back, some of them actually do come back to their own state and have to establish themselves again within that state. Once they in good terms with the business connection and also stay relevant with the community if they're going to continue to still be doing film within their own hometown if they choose to go reside back there again.
I'm a case in point. I left Pittsburgh and went to Hollywood, and I was out in LA for 17 years and came back and pretty much had to reestablish myself. I was fortunate in the fact that I had worked with George so many times that a lot of people that were still working in Pittsburgh were part of that Romero family. So I did know a lot of people when I got back to Pittsburgh. My dream was always to produce, and I was still doing some acting when I got back from LA. I had done a little bit of acting, but I was looking more for opportunities to produce and started moving towards that. That was a tough pivot at a time where you didn't have a lot of runaway production like you do today. If you look at states like Georgia, the last 2 years, actually 21 and 22, they did something like 130 some projects in Georgia. Films, television series. There's more ways to work outside of Hollywood today than there's ever been. I'm a full-time professor at the University of Cincinnati, and I always encourage my students to look at that southeast corner of the country, because between Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, those 3 states alone, you've got 200 and some projects that are going on, and the cost of living is only about 5% more expensive than Pittsburgh, for example. It's 80% cheaper living in Atlanta than it is in Los Angeles. So if I were getting started today, I would take a hard look at cities like Atlanta. Pennsylvania, where I live, needs to uncap its tax credit. Production companies always look at that tax incentive, that tax credit incentive, and they did raise ours a bit in Pennsylvania. We went from 70 million up to 90 million. But still, if Will Smith and M. Night Shyamalan do a movie in Philadelphia, do a couple of movies in Philly, that can eat up that tax incentive pretty quickly. So some states, I know Ohio right now is thinking about going to an unlimited, uncapped tax incentive. And you'll see, just based on that uncapped tax incentive, their production will increase tenfold in Ohio if that happens. There's more opportunities to go home from LA and New York and work now, or work closer to home, than there ever has been in the past.
Go ahead and plug in any websites or anything that you care to promote or even add to this.
The biggest piece of advice I can give people that want to do this is just go out and do it. Don't worry so much about the money. Definitely don't worry about the fame. Just go do it. Do the work. Learn the process. Do anything and everything you can. The easiest entry positions are things like production assistants, and go get a production assistant job. It's hard work, it's long days, it's long hours, but you do it enough times, you will learn how a movie gets made, how a TV show gets produced. Go do the work, whatever it takes. If you want to be an actor and you're just starting out, don't be afraid to go be a PA, because it helps you network. You start meeting people. You prove that you're willing to do the work and you can get the work done. Go be an extra a few times and see how that process works. I recommend doing that on a legitimate budgeted project where it's not going to be too painful of a process for you. But get started. Just go do it and don't worry about anything else. It's really all about networking, meeting people, getting that experience, learning how the process works, and that's the best piece of advice I can give anybody.
Well, there you have it, everybody. That is producer and actor Marty Schiff.
Thanks, Mike.